Hello there, everyone. My name is Carpo, and I think a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean what I think about is productive or that it matters. It just means that I think a lot. And sometimes I will sit and think about some particular subject for a while, to the point where it just kind of follows me around for a period of time, maybe weeks, months, years. And I'll revisit this idea over and over again. And I'm not afraid to admit that I've changed my opinions on many subjects over the years. I think most of my core beliefs and ideals have remained consistent since I was younger. But the methods and the understanding of people is what's changed. And I think understanding people has been my single most useful and important skill that I've ever attempted to acquire. And I say attempted because assuming you understand people is how we got ourselves into this mess in the first place. I have a few things I want to talk about, including a few questions subscribers have asked me, and discussing some of the current issues going on, as well as how we got to this point where we are dumbed down, and ask, are we becoming an ignorant species? Are we becoming stupid? And a person could argue we've always been stupid. Let me use stupid and give you a definition. What I mean is that there is information at our fingertips to educate ourselves about how to best live our lives. Things to avoid: don't touch a stove, don't fall off a cliff, use these safety equipment, do these things to prevent yourself from dying or killing others. That's just basic, skills that we learn, right? Or to feed yourself and your family, how to hunt, to do these things. At one time, we had to learn how to hunt. We had to learn how to farm. We had to learn how to be a merchant. We had to actually take initiative in our lives. And if we didn't, we died. In today's world, we are dumbed down because we are allowed to be lazy. And when I say lazy, I don't mean that we don't work hard. That's the problem. That's what we're facing right now. We are working harder than we've ever worked, and we're getting less for it. And all of us have to deal with that in this country. Higher prices for pharmaceuticals, for groceries, for land, for property. In many other countries, these things are, I wouldn't say so much socialized, but the government works for the people. And in this country, the government has convinced half of the people that it works for them by using propaganda and media outlets. And that entire side is convinced the other side is wrong. And we are sitting here stuck in this impasse where a majority of people are relatively moderate, and then we have extremists on both sides who want to fight about who's destroying the country. Not only have we been dumbed down by television, but we've been dumbed down by reality television. The things that we're willing to accept. The Learning Channel, the History Channel, Ancient Aliens, and how fat of a person can you find to put on the television to say, look at this person. Look at this huge person, or look at this dumb person, or look at this poor person, or look at these hoarders over here. And everybody's just rubbernecking, looking at other people saying, oh, man, their life is so much worse than mine. That's not the kind of society I want to live in. But I'm in it, and I have to cope with it. I have to deal with it. I have to deal with the fact that intellect is ridiculed. That having awareness and intelligence is considered something laughable by many people. Late night television shows are just garbage. A lot of people know that I lean left, but I cringe at Stephen Colbert and most of the late night people who, just have these extreme left opinions, which maybe I agree with some of them, but the way they carry themselves is just appalling. And then I look back this morning to this guy. You may not have heard of him, or you may have heard of him, Dick Cavett, who was a late-night talk show host back in the Johnny Carson days, or before then, actually. And he brought up important issues on his show. Issues of racism, issues of sexism, issues about the government, Vietnam, going into wars. What happened to all that? Where did it go? When did the mainstream abandon any semblance of importance in talking about the issues? The fact that more soldiers are overseas than ever before, but we just tend to ignore it because out of sight, out of mind. If the media is not talking about it, we don't care. And I'm going to tell you, it was during the Nixon administration that things really started to go downhill. There are dozens of recordings of Nixon saying, we need to get rid of these people, get rid of these people. We need to take out these guys and those guys and get rid of those protesters and get rid of these people. It is absurd what the government has done to silence the people over the years. And we move forward to 2020. Now we have people protesting because they want police reform. For example, we have a whole group of people screaming in their faces saying, go home, go home. I have seen some of the most absurd things over the past week or two. One angry white guy screaming at 100 protesters, walking down the line saying, go home, you're not making any difference. I think, hey, this isn't an insult to that one guy. It's a reality check to anybody who thinks that way to say, look, you are one person. These are multiple people. If you understand the First Amendment in this country, then you understand that you should go home, right? But the media has convinced people that these people are all out to get them and riot in their towns. The same people who are screaming that everybody else watching mainstream news are the same ones that watch the biggest mainstream news network in the country, Fox News, or Trump's own channel, One American News Network. There are people who actually think that is legitimate news. Or the Epoch Times, which is another pro-Trump foreign paper, whatever it might be, website. Science is now ridiculed, and pandering to religion by holding a Bible in front of a church for a photo op has become okay. It's acceptable. People believe it. I hate comparing this to Idiocracy, but I feel like we're there. It just cringe whenever somebody says, oh, it's like Idiocracy. But honestly, every week it seems like we're getting closer and closer to that reality. Sponsored by this, sponsored by that. Come stay in our hotels. I even saw Trump tweet about some of his new hotels or his revamped hotels opening up the other day. And I thought, at a time like this, the President of the United States is retweeting his son's post about their new hotels. That is what people are willing to say is okay. So, one of the greatest wool pulled over the people's eyes is the idea that if you keep people working, then they're not thinking. We have a long work week, people work their asses off, they don't have time to come home and do critical research or to get involved in their neighborhood groups or their communities to make a difference. And that's why during this time of COVID, people have had so much time off. They've had a lot more time to think and organize, which is something people have needed for a long time. They can see the gentrification taking place that's posing as change. And I know a lot of folks like to point the finger at the left or the poor, the liberals, the blacks, whatever it might be, but the rich are not your friends. I found a lot of Americans idolize the rich. Rich people get bored. They run out of things to excite them. So they go out and they, like I was thinking, I came across this article this morning about Donald Trump Jr. when he was hunting this this rare, endangered sheep. And how he after killing it, was able to get this permit, to kill this endangered, beautiful animal. The fact that an American citizen would go use taxpayer money and Secret Service, I think it was like $80,000 to have them go with him to protect him during this big game hunt. And there are people who celebrate that out there. There are still human beings who actually see a guy who's killed an animal with a gun and say, wow, what a hero. There are people celebrating people shooting animals with guns that shoot themselves. I've seen some of the automatic shooting guns that are you just have to be within range and just boom. The way I see it, it doesn't matter if you're hunting with a fucking Bowie knife. If you're killing an endangered animal to get your rocks off, you are so disconnected. but from people and from nature. But it also shows me that people are willing to make any excuse, because there's already somebody out there with their wheels turning saying, no, these help with conservation and they help to improve. No, all of that aside, what is the reason for an individual wanting to go kill an animal for sport? It fascinates me. But it's not only that, but the fact that they get special treatment. That rich people, just like the police, just like Congress and presidents, they get special treatment, preferential treatment, that they're not held to the same standards as everyone else. And not just that they have special treatment, but that people are willing to accept that as normal. Meanwhile, the average citizen says, well, if you don't break the law, you won't have any problems. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this or seen this comment over the past couple weeks. Well, why are people complaining about the police? If you don't break any laws, you won't have any problems. Which is complete bullshit. Have you ever heard of eminent domain? Now, there's an entire neighborhoods that have been basically forced out of their homes, decent homes, to make way for gentrification, beautifying new neighborhoods, to bring in tourism, to bring in roads, or whatever it might be. And there are tons of stories that I can share with you. I mean, these are the things that I watch documentaries about, gentrification, people losing their homes to, like there was something like 80 or 100 homes in this one area. I can't recall if it was in Georgia or Alabama, but they basically told the people, you leave or else we're going to make you leave. And the people refused. So they started giving them fines for broken screen, like a tear in the screen, $50 a month. Or your lawn is a little bit too long. Things like that. They were basically intimidating and harassing the citizens of the city to get them out for new people. And nobody could afford to live in these new homes that they wanted to build, right? But as one old guy was saying, he's like, I thought that when I moved in here and bought a home, I was safe. I thought that this is America. We have freedom. I can buy land and I'm good to go. Well, when the fines don't work on the people, then they come in with eminent domain, which basically means we're going to build something more important here and you have to sell your house and you have no choice. We're going to bulldoze it. And if you're not aware of eminent domain, it's been going on forever. I mean, cities have torn down entire villages and small communities to build bigger buildings, more and more and more. The poor and the people who are already basically hanging on to nothing get forced out. And people celebrate this. Hey, it's more real estate. We've got slumlords like Jared Kushner, for example. I've heard stories about that guy I had nothing against the guy until I watched a documentary about people who had lived in some of his buildings, his tenants, that said they wouldn't fix anything. They just basically tell you if you don't like it, move. And I think how shameful, These are the kind of people that are not just assholes. There's always going to be assholes, but that they're celebrated. And on top of people being forced off their land, we have civil forfeiture, which I've talked about many times. But civil asset forfeiture just means that basically if you get pulled over and a cop says you have a lot of money on you and they find it, they can take it without charging you with a crime, without arresting you or doing anything. They can take your money and your car without charging you with a crime. And this is a fact. In America, an officer can stop you on the street randomly, search you. If he finds money, he can take it and hang on to it to say it was drug money, regardless of what you say. And it's always your word against theirs. So even if you're going to buy a car off Craigslist, maybe you're going to buy a gold ring or something, it doesn't matter. The rich people have a way to get out of this because they can just buy their way out of anything. They can pay their bail. Just like, for example, a lot of the cops who have been arrested for abusing people during this whole period over the last couple of weeks have been bailed out. One cop had a fund that bailed him out for $750,000, which means a whole bunch of people were willing to chip in $750,000 to bail out a cop. And my thought is, if he's innocent, why do you need to bail him out? Shouldn't he be released on his own recognizance? But people don't understand the system and how that works. They just want to celebrate authority without considering that they, you, me, we are the authority. The things I've heard lately about what's going on in other states when people are blaming Seattle or California or Oregon saying, you should do this way. I'm like, wait a minute, what happened to autonomy? Everybody does things differently. Hey, if you want to teach the Bible in your schools in Alabama, go for it. If that's what you vote for. But up here, if people want to have an autonomous zone, let them. It's none of your fucking business. Anybody in the rest of the country. But people want to make people's business their business because they've got nothing better to do than complain about other people. The damn liberals or the damn conservatives. The only time I complain about people is when they're doing real damage to society. And so, yes, I can argue against the looters, but I can also argue against the armed militias who are standing in the streets in places causing trouble with them, or the guys screaming at people who are peacefully protesting. There will always be arguments from every side. But meanwhile, I don't understand this. For all the militias out there, and I'm going to tell you, if there's anybody out there who considers themselves a patriot or a right-wing militia member, I would be curious to know why. I mean, I mentioned this before. Of course, I don't expect you to stand with the protesters. Okay, you think everybody's Antifa and they're all out to cause problems. So be it. But why are you standing up for the police if you claim to be anti-government? Why is it that people think that the police are only good when they want them to be good, but when they interfere with their needs, or their problem, I could go on and on. This is the paper I'm going to read later about the ATF and what they did at Ruby Ridge. And it's very in support of the Second Amendment. A lot of people, whenever I talk about these things and say anything bad about Trump, they're like, oh, you damn liberals, you damn Democrats. I'm not a fucking Democrat. I can't stand Biden. I can't stand any of these candidates. I'm just speaking it like I see it. And I thought telling it like it is what mattered, right? And I'm telling it like it is. Anybody who gets up that far in politics really doesn't give too much of a shit about you. Doesn't matter who it is. There's no draining the swamp. There's no fixing the problems when you're bringing in people from Wall Street as your executives and oil barons. And that's why I say bad things about Trump. Everything he said he was going to do as far as getting rid of the swamp, he brought in more swamp members. You can go ahead and check every one of his cabinet members that he's hired and fired over the last 4 years. And every one of them, every single one of them, is either a millionaire or a CEO or is vested with some other company. There are no average Joes. There are no blue-collar workers or people who have really earned it or care about the people. And I stand by that. I've looked at, Mnuchin? Do you really think that guy gives a shit about your wallet? Look. As far as, say, I said that about the civil asset forfeiture, there are SWAT teams and entire raids that have taken out legal cannabis operations, say in California. I think it was San Diego, where one guy took his money, his whole legal cannabis, medical cannabis business, even though he had all the papers and everything, didn't charge him with a crime, still haven't charged him with a crime. Eventually he had to sue them. But they took something like $300,000, including draining all of his bank accounts, his wife's bank account, and even his family, his daughters, his kids that were going to college. Everybody completely wiped him out. This is the kind of thing that the government can do to people when they have a gripe with you. And I don't know the particular gripe they had with this guy, but, it's really dangerous out there when you speak out against tyranny. At the very best, you might get arrested or beaten. If you speak too loudly, you might get shot. And I'm not joking, I mean, there are assassination lists that the government, our own CIA had. And yes, MLK was on that list, but also a lot of white guys. So whether it's a race issue or not, it really just has to do with power and control. And people want the power and control over us. So, we've been dumbed down by conglomerate media for so long that I'm just ashamed to be a human sometimes. It's like this mob mentality. And it's working for the wealthy, but not for the average citizen. Wage has stagnated while inflation has gotten worse. And to kind of reiterate or make another point about this Second Amendment, I know a lot of people like to march around with guns and, say this is my right. And I should never not be able to carry my gun into a store. And this is a side note. I want you to go back, and I want you to look back into the wild, wild west here in the West. In many of the towns, when you would come to the edge of town, you were required to turn over your firearms to a deputy. There's this old saying that a armed society is a polite society. And in some instances, this is true. But I just want to say that guns aren't the be-all, end-all. And I'm not saying that to say you shouldn't have a gun. I support the Second Amendment. What I'm doing that is to say most people can overcome our disagreements without weapons. You don't have to patrol with firearms against protesters or people who you're afraid might loot. Even if you're willing to take a life for stealing something, to me that just shows a degree of lack of control and understanding about, the need for a firearm. But that's, I guess, a different story altogether. My issue is not with Second Amendment supporters. It is with white supremacists. I think they're disgusting, and they just don't understand the foundation of this country at all. But the cops, many of them follow these types of, behaviors of this Gestapo-like attitude by covering their badge numbers. Been doing this plenty of times. They've been beating up people who are handcuffed lately, and a lot of folks will instantly go to, well, people shouldn't be resisting, or that's what you get for protesting. Anybody who says that, it's just disgusting, Really, that's a First Amendment. I'm sorry, regardless of your Second Amendment, that is a First Amendment right to say what you want to say. And I don't give a shit if you'd like to hear it or not. If you're screaming in somebody's face telling them to go home because they're holding a sign protesting, you should be ashamed of yourself. You are not standing up for anything that America really stands for. That's my opinion. But when it comes to cops, they should be held to a higher standard, and they aren't. The unions protect them. They know this. They know they won't be charged. They won't have problems. So in the last 2 weeks, I've seen so much abuse and so many vengeful cops and angry cops. And yeah, they have a right to be angry because we're pissed at them. But what do you do about it? Are you just going to fight back and forth constantly? Flip off the cops, have them flip you off? What is the resolution? Well, that's why we have lists of demands, and people need to take their power back. It's a great time to do that. Technology, a lot of people, and this is why I'm disappointed. I really thought that technology was going to bring us into kind of a golden age, but all it's brought us is gentrification and disagreement. And it's sad, but it is what it is. You can't change it right now. You just got to go with the flow and see what happens. So when somebody asked me yesterday, hey, I bet you're a supporter of Chaz, my question was, who the hell is Chaz? And then this morning I saw this news article about Chaz, which is, I guess, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone up in Washington and Seattle. And if you watch right-wing news, Fox, or any of the others, which I do watch their articles to see what they're saying, you would think that it's a hellhole of fucking firearms and looting and burning. They would show a scene from the street along with burning buildings in the background, which were from a week before in Minneapolis. Then they'd show a whole bunch of armed people and looting, which was not happening there. And they had to retract, and change the film because they were called out on it. It's just a whole propaganda show of people over there on the East Coast telling us what we need to do on the West Coast. And it was like Tucker Carlson. I watched his little report, and he's like, these people up there, he's like, burning their sticky buds. I just bust up laughing. I mean, the dude is so out of touch. But I have a friend who likes Tucker Carlson. I know a lot of people who like Tucker Carlson. I think the dude is a complete doofus. He's playing everybody, and I also know that he's totally out of touch with anybody on the left or any reality of what really goes on with our sticky buds. But, these are like the stiffs, the squares, right, from back in the 60s. The suit-wearing morons who sit behind a desk and pretend like they understand what happens in this country. But the same thing happens with a lot of people in small towns. They think they know what's going on in this country because they see it on the internets. And I'm not dissing and saying people in small towns are dumb. I love small towns. There's a lot of intelligent people everywhere. But there are also people who get wrapped up in what they think's happening in the city and they get ultra paranoid, and then they have 200 people standing in their streets boarding up windows with guns thinking that Antifa is going to busload people into their city. And I've read the comment sections. There are people who will defend it to the teeth. They will tell me Antifa showed up in my town, or they were there and there was a busload and we scared them off. The only story I've really heard of a bus, there was only two bus stories from Antifa. One of them was a busload, was a coach bus, a travel bus, where the owner was pleading with people to stop harassing his employees because they were picking up people for legitimate coastal tours or whatever it was. And the other one was a family where 7 cars locked them into their campsite. A family of 4 in a school bus that was camping. They chopped down a couple trees across the road so they couldn't escape their campsite. A bunch of college kids eventually came in and had to help them out to get out, saying that they were Antifa. Real world harm done to real people because of people's paranoid fantasies. Their idea that they're going to boogaloo and this is a civil war and we're going to fight against Antifa, it's not productive. And the reason I bring them up is because you should definitely be seeing the tyranny. Most of these militias are afraid that the government is going to tyrannically take over their rights to speak or their rights to have firearms, and all of a sudden the police are actually doing that and they're standing up against the protesters. It amazes me, but I'm not surprised, and that's why I think that we've become dumbed down to the point where the propaganda fools people and they just want to fight amongst each other, so fucking let them, right? I'm gonna live my life. I got a vacation to go on. I got some parties to go to. I got concerts to see. I have family to enjoy times with. I don't sit and dwell on this shit all day long. But when I get into a video talking about it, I have to go on and on and on. So get it out of my system. Talk to y'all later.